diverse set of reasons. Today I'll tell you about some of the work we've been doing in trying to account for human factors in algorithm design. And it turns out virtual marketplaces, which I'll define in a minute, are really a very good opportunity to do that. Okay? So hopefully by the end of this I'll convince you that you'd want to look into human factors when designing algorithms. So many logos, but the French like titles and logos, but basically I'm a researcher and I work for a French institution called CNRS that has mostly mathematicians, physicists, and people in the humanities, and very few computer scientists. All right, so what are virtual marketplaces? They're these places that are online where people find jobs. So there's one perception that one definition they can have, but you can also define them from the perspective of those requesters, those who have a piece of work to get done, who are looking for labor. Okay? I'm going to talk about two kinds of virtual marketplaces that we worked with. So we mostly worked with crowdsourcing platforms, and we lately have been moving into looking at virtual freelancing marketplaces. So what are crowdsourcing platforms? That work is presented in the form of micro-tasks that are things like image labeling, sentiment recognition, a lot of it is applied to tweets, for instance, or collaborative tasks, right, where people get together and have complementary expertise to achieve a particular task, such as going out and, for instance, in Paris, there is this big project at the Museum of National History where people are grouped together to go and take pictures of insects and plants, right, and to build sort of this database, the biodiversity database. The other kind of virtual marketplaces, I'll sort of talk about later in the talk, are freelancing marketplaces. Work is presented as micro gigs, and micro gigs are things like, I'd like somebody to prepare my resume, and here is information about me, can you prepare a resume for me? So this is fully virtual, right? You don't necessarily meet the person who's going to work for you. But there's also things where you can, for instance, hire somebody to move furniture or to fix your plumbing, right? So it's sort of like virtual and physical. Anyway, so that's what I mean by virtual marketplaces. So basically crowdsourcing and freelancing platforms, and it turns out, sort of people play a major role, obviously, in these marketplaces.
Is Uber one of these?
It is a marketplace. For me, I'm interested mostly in cases where there is a link between these marketplaces and data science through data production and data curation. Okay, so I'm really narrowing that down into that. But yes, they've been defined as virtual marketplaces that play as sort of intermediaries that sort of put together in contact people who have a service to offer and people who need that service. But yeah, so the focus here is sort of virtual marketplaces used for tasks that are around data, producing data and cleaning data and so on. Okay, and the main observation I'm going to start with is that data science is about data, right? So it cares about data quality, insights from data, and how to involve humans through these tasks to enable that, right? But I mean, humans themselves care about many other things, right? They care about how they're doing, how they're performing. What are their skills? What is the feedback the system may have for them? They care about, what is their experience, right? How bored they get after a while, how much fatigue they experience, what is their motivation in terms, really what drives them, what's the incentive, right, of these people to go and complete these tasks. They care about how they're perceived, right? A lot of work around reputation and trust on these platforms. And they also care about how they're treated, right, especially by algorithms on these platforms, right? So the reason I'm mentioning this is that this is more or less, this is kind of a loose definition of what I mean by human factors, and we've looked at some of these, okay? And so here's how things present themselves, a few examples, and then I'll dive into some of the questions we looked at, okay? So crowdsourcing for data, used for data production, usually the way it happens is that you have workers on one side, micro-tasks on others, where people are asked to, say, tag pictures, right? So label data, right? And a lot of that data then is used, for instance, to train algorithms, right? And come up with, build models, right? So crowdsourcing platforms play as a sort of intermediaries that put together sort of these requesters and workers. And there are a bunch of them. I mean, Amazon Mechanical Turk is the oldest. It's been around for about 10 years. At any point in time, it has between 3,000 and 5,000 people who are active, or at least this is what is claimed on this platform. And then there's some others. For instance, Figure 8 is a new incarnation of Crowdflower that is built on top of Mechanical Turk, and it offers additional services such as breaking your tasks into microtasks, so there is extra services that are done on top. Crowd4U, we've been working on this platform because it's a fully academic platform, and it's been developed by people at the University of Tsukuba in Japan, and we can experiment with our algorithms on this platform, and a few others. Okay? So here's one example that I like quite a bit, and so the New York Public Library opened a lab about 8 years ago, where they deployed a number of tasks to build the cultural heritage of New York City. Okay? And this one is a task that's called Together We Listen. There's a bunch of others. And here, there are actually 3 tasks within this task. One is people are invited to record themselves about their experience in their neighborhood. For instance, this lady, she generated a 1 hour and 10-minute sort of recording of her experience going to the bakery, Italian neighborhood in New York City, in the Bronx, going to some bakery and relationship with other people and so on. Then there is a sort of a generation, basically a translation of that into text, right? So this text is transcribed, all the videos are transcribed into text, and then this text is presented to people to fix it, right? So they listen to the video and then they fix the text according to what they hear. Okay? And there's like many tasks that are available on the New York Public Library. They're very interesting tasks. For instance, looking at all the maps of New York City and trying to sort of do mapping between the maps and find some streets and which streets have disappeared over time. Looking at all the menus of like some dignitary that has traveled through New York City and what food he had sort of at that restaurant. So anyway, so all of these, why did this take off? Is because a lot of these tasks are just much easier to get done by humans than by machines. Okay? Here is sort of a typical example on Amazon Mechanical Turk, which has reportedly the highest number of contributors. And this one is sort of simply, this is something that now OCR systems are able to do, look at a receipt and give you sort of structured data out of that receipt. But you could imagine other kind of pictures out of which you want to label and then learn some model to be able to do it automatically. Okay? So this is how people find the tasks on something like Amazon Mechanical Turk. Okay? So here I'm not logged in, but it's sort of not much changes if I log in. Tasks are simply ranked lists, right? And they're given, you can rank them then by a number of criteria, but that's pretty much all you get, okay? And so as a worker, you need to sort of rummage through a long list of tasks to find tasks that are relevant to you. So naturally, people who design algorithms thought about, matching workers and tasks, right? So that's sort of a natural thing to think about. Here is for freelancing, just a quick introduction about freelancing. It's sort of the same concept of a platform that sits in between people and jobs. But as I said, the jobs are more like temp jobs, right? You get paid, by the hour, and you can state a number of criteria, and then the system does this matchmaking. TaskRabbit and Fiverr are US ones, and then these are good friends. That's why I'm mentioning them. Okay, so this is how it looks like. You go in, and then you can find jobs that are it's a little more structured in the sense that, you have a taxonomy, and then you click on things, and you're interested in finding a job for heavy lifting or in offering, a job in heavy lifting, and you can find a list of people. Okay, this is another one, and it's fine. Okay, so let's now move on to the rest of the talk. And really what I'd like to talk about, and I already said that, is sort of to advocate for awareness of human factors in designing algorithms in virtual marketplaces, and the message is that not only it's important, but it also opens like really some interesting sort of algorithmic design questions. Okay? And so I'm going to start first by talking about how to account for skill which is sort of a natural thing you can think about if you're matching tasks to workers. Move on to motivation, and then move on to the question of fairness. Okay? So skill and motivation. All right, so what is algorithmic task assignment in this context? So self-appointment to tasks, like it is done today mostly, except that on freelancing, they actually claim that they use algorithms, right, that match people with, according to and tasks according to their skills. But say, for instance, on Mechanical Turk, you self-appoint yourself to tasks, right? And then the requester decides that he or she agrees to you being the worker of that task, okay? And so the algorithmic task assignment problem can be viewed in many different ways. You can look at it as a sort of a matching problem, as a sort of a mapping problem, and so on. The way we looked at it is as follows. We are assuming that we have collaborative tasks, because this is where we start really seeing some interesting algorithmic questions. So tasks that require people to work together to do something. For instance, citizen reporting, right? So asking people to write about a particular event, that happened, right, in their city. And so the input tasks are collaborative tasks and workers. And what we'd like to do is to build one team per task. So it's a team formation problem. Right? So this is one instance of a problem that is a well-known problem. It's been looked at with different variants and different constraints. And we're going to assume a number of things about tasks and workers. And this is what we get from Mechanical Turk. We get that tasks actually have some budget constraint. So as a requester, you have a certain amount of money you want to spend. There is a required expertise. For instance, if it's a video, if it's just checking text in English, the worker has to understand English. Okay? So it's not so much of an expertise from the point, the term is maybe a little too strong, but it's it's some required skill or knowledge. And there is sort of an expected quality in mind, right? So the way it works is that today it's done sort of after the fact. As a requester, you can contribute something, and then, as a worker, you contribute something, and then a requester looks at what you've contributed to, and then says, okay, you get paid, or no, I'm not happy, you don't get paid. Okay? That's how it works today. Okay? So obviously there is some expected quality level of what the crowd work contribution. And then each worker has a number of things that we can assume about her, such as skill or knowledge, about some topic. Expected wage, okay? How much this is sort of how workers are perceiving these tasks, right? This task pays this much, I'm taking it, I'm applying for it. This task costs this much, I'm not, right? And some acceptance ratio, which is a computed attribute that is simply, out of all the tasks that this worker has contributed so far, what is the proportion of those tasks that requesters accepted? Okay, so it's some, very simple way of computing reputation, right? Okay, and so where's my problem formulation? Yeah, let me give a problem formulation first. And so, as I said, I have a set of tasks as input, and I have a set of workers, and I want to form one team per task. And I can formulate a very simple optimization problem where I want to maximize the total value of tasks. And the value of a task is simply an aggregation of the contributions of individual people in the team. Okay? So how do I phrase the value, formulate the value of the task? It's simply a sort of a weighted linear combination of individual contributions, which I'll come back to, contributions of people to the task in the same team, and sort of the inverse of how much they get paid. So basically what I want is to get as many good people or qualified people as I can, for as little as possible. All right? So very simple formulation, and there are some constraints of budget and task quality, expected quality. Okay? So this was sort of very early on. We did that sometime in 2012, 2013, and how you would express sort of the quality of the outcome can be done also simply by summing up individual worker skills subject to their acceptance ratio, and also weighted by whether or not they're part of a team. Okay? And this is just some constraints over the total number of tasks that an individual gets, a worker gets. We're capping this at min and max to avoid having to, basically what happens is that sort of people who are highly skilled end up getting assigned to all the teams, right? So we're trying to sort of cap that, right? So quite a simple formulation. And okay, I mean, this is what happens. Basically, as an outcome, what we would like is to form teams of individuals who are going to contribute to a task. As I said earlier, the application we looked at here is people who are going to write a piece of text together around the topic, okay? So they have to know about that topic, so we have to figure that out. Do they know about the topic? We have to hire them, and then we have to check, right, whether or not their contribution, has good value or not, high value, high quality or not. Okay? Of course, in aggregating the skills of individuals, I could be using other aggregation functions, right? I'm using this one. People have used all sorts of other aggregation functions, right? So this is actually a hard problem, and I'm not going to the details of how we show this. It's some multiple knapsack reduction problem. Yeah?
So one worker can be assigned to more than one task.
That's right. Yeah. And so we can show that it's a difficult problem, and so what we did is we actually developed a bunch of algorithms, and just to give you a sense of what we started with some heuristics, and then we have some approximation algorithms with approximation, pretty tight approximation factors, but the approximation factors actually work reasonably well. In two cases. Basically, the way you go about this is the function is, monotone, and when, for instance, in this case, if people are not paid, in the case where you're not compensating people, the function has a monotonic behavior, right? So you can make the approximation bound tighter, or it's just submodular, and this function is actually submodular, right? And that's how we do our approximations. Yeah.
How do you know that the quality of your work is good?
That's right. It's a good point. So here is what happens. Okay. So this is still mostly state of the art. Okay. That it is the requester who has to figure out how to do what they call pre-qualification tests. So the pre-qualification test in our case was for different topics. So basically the tasks that we had in the deployment where we wanted to form a team for each one of these topics and bring people together to write a piece of text describing this topic, okay? With certain constraints on the length of that piece of text, and we only gave them 48 hours, right? So basically we use a mechanical Turk as a hiring platform, then we redirect them into a Google Doc, and we let them work, and then we take the text and we try to figure out what the quality of that text is. Okay? So the way it works is that phase one, so you can ask people a number of questions, right, in such a way that you can then infer their skills, which is like the most basic way to do it, but it turns out it's what most people are doing these days. We do have a paper 2 years ago at the LDB that looks at people computing tasks and then does some inference from your, and we actually show that we do a better job than asking people, okay? So it's sort of some matrix factorization, that's how we model the problem, and we can infer people's skills. But in this piece of work, we simply ask people a bunch of questions, right? And then, we form teams, and the teams happen to be formed by 20 workers, and each team would work on a particular topic. For instance, about the political unrest in Egypt, at the time when there was the Arab Spring, we had a bunch of questions that have to do, of course, related to this topic, right? And then the same for the others, which is very, very time-consuming, right? To handcraft all these questions and run them by a bunch of people and eventually give them a token so they can log into the next task, okay? And then the way we worked to validate the outcome, the text that they built together, that they wrote together, is we also submitted it to a bunch of other people who have been hired through a similar process, and asked them a number of things about the text. This comes from some text processing community, right? What is the completeness of the text with respect to the topic, the grammar, the novelty, and all sorts of other questions. And here we asked 30 people per, just to get some statistical significance, asked 30 people per task, right? a bunch of such questions and aggregating those questions, the answers to those questions. Okay. Another question that comes up quite often also when I get to this slide is how do we determine the number of people per task, right? And there's actually a formula you can use. It comes from the central limit theorem formula, where given that you want to get this much, you have this much confidence, right, in the answers, you can sort of reverse engineer the number of people you want for a particular task. And given a certain level of skill of those people, you can reverse engineer the number of people you need for a certain task. Okay. So here is one set of examples. And one more thing. After we gathered skills here, we also gathered how much people were expecting to get paid, expected wage. Okay? And we looked at sort of correlation between those two. And it actually looked, it was good. I mean, for those for which it wasn't good, we got rid of. But it looked, for instance, it showed, for instance, that all of that is in the paper, but it showed that there was a high correlation between, skill and expected wage, right? So people are kind of aware of what they're able to do, and that matches how much they're expecting to get paid. Okay, so that sort of validates a little bit the first phase. All right, so this is some example of some of the results that we got. Okay, and just you can focus on the blue and the dark, the black thing, right? So this is again aggregating the results, the answers of 30 people who were asked about the quality of the contributions, right, for each one of them. So we have PlayStation games and the Egyptian thing, and we're looking at one thing is that we're consistently doing better along all these different dimensions, right, in terms of the quality of the outcome, right, based on crowdsourcing the quality of the outcome, and better than what we're calling benchmark. There was another variant of the algorithm, but let's forget it. But so benchmark is just letting people self-appoint themselves to tasks, okay? Versus doing the matching in such a way that we are maximizing the quality of the outcome, okay? And some other interesting things based on the, some of these topics were not chosen at random. I mean, some are a little more controversial than others. And so, it seems that we're actually not the overall, for instance, we're not doing as well as some other pieces, but we are, sort of the difference between the baseline and our method is higher, okay? So this is for the good news, but I do have bad news, okay? And the bad news are the following, okay? The bad news is that, it's all good, you're running an algorithm, you're maximizing, some objective, like quality in this case. You put people together, you redirect them to a Google Doc, and sometimes people just don't agree. They're like writing and deleting each other's contributions. Some other times people don't even show up. Okay? So the case where people don't show up, you need to re-optimize, right? In some marginal way, right? Find a replacement. So that's sort of a purely algorithmic problem. But then, even if you have the right team, like people are qualified, right? They're supposed to be doing something, they're actually just not agreeing with each other. It's sort of something quite common in collaborative editing, like Wikipedia and others, editors, okay? And it's one of those things, once you say it, it's obvious, but before you know it, you're like, what's going on with these people? There's a problem. And you look around, and obviously what happens is that we took skill and cost, or expected wage, into account, but we didn't take a number of other things that are quite well known in the social sciences, and in particular, things that people have studied heavily in the mid-70s, in humanities, and things that have to do with sort of group synergy, right? Ability to work together, right? And this can be represented as affinity in a group and critical mass, which is the size of the group, right? The size of the team. So this is what we refer to as group-level human factors, in a sense, right? So we took into account individual factors, but we hadn't taken into account group-level human factors, and that's really why I'm talking about collaborative tasks, right? Where it matters that people are able to work together. So there is a way of reformulating this problem into a problem of team formation, but by accounting for some notion of affinity. Okay? Many ways of looking into affinity, and the actual attributes that are used to compute affinity between individuals. Here is one way to look at it. You can look at it as the distance, the maximum, the diameter of a team, right? And it turns out this is pretty common in collaborative editing because the diameter of a team really represents the two most conflicting individuals, right? That may be causing trouble, deleting each other's contribution, non-converging, right? And so that's one way to look at it. And then the critical mass is something that has been looked at, but very much empirically, right? What is the right group size to do this job? What is the right group size to do this other job? Right? And so basically this led us to reformulating the problem of team formation into sort of a problem where we also need to account for affinity between individuals, right? So basically what we want is to minimize the diameter in a team, and then critical mass is about the size. Yeah?
But affinity goes in the other direction of complementarity.
Here I'm talking about distance, but it's 1 minus distance, of course, for affinity. And are you saying that affinity is a good thing?
Peanut butter and jelly. I want things that are different because they go well together. So I don't want to have things that look similar.
Oh, yeah, we didn't look at it that way. We simply looked at, if we were to take one definition of affinity, how would that affect our algorithm and how would that affect the results? But you could, that's right. You could say that I have a certain number of attributes that I would use for distance and have a certain number of attributes that I would use for similarity and have both. Yeah, we don't have that. Okay, so here is how we looked at it. We basically revisited the objective to minimize sort of this diameter, right, forming a group, minimize the total diameter of the group, and plus the sort of the interdistance between any two groups that you may be forming. So basically the whole idea is that instead of building a single group, because the group may be too large, whenever the group is too large, we need to break it, right, into multiple groups that would contribute to the same text. And we formulated sort of like a clustering problem, right, where we want to make sure that the within group distance is minimized and the across group distance is maximized. Okay, and then there are a number of constraints on skill and so on, and I have a bunch of things that talk about the fact that it is a hard problem and that we have a two-stage approach. So one is to, first we form a single team that goes for skill and cost, just like we did before. And then we decompose it into smaller teams that satisfy critical mass K. Okay? So we give a K and then we optimize for that K, and then we try again and we try again. Okay? And for this also we have a bunch of approximations. Okay? But here's what I want to show you more sort of in terms of what happens in practice. And so what happens in practice, there are 2 examples only I have here, I think. Yeah, so this is, for instance, we gave a translation task. We asked people to translate a piece of text from one language to another. That was English and French and Urdu, and I mean, it was all just what the co-authors of the paper could read or understand, Arabic also. And so we got people, we formed sort of the teams, and we took a very simple definition of affinity. Of course, there are all sorts of like tests, that can be used to, to come up with the number of attributes to be used for affinity, such as sort of your leadership abilities and all sorts of other things. But we took quite a simple one, which is region-based, age and gender-based, thinking that people who are in the same age group and come from the same region are going to express themselves similarly in a particular language. That's the idea. We did our optimization, and what we're generally seeing here is that in the case, so this case is a case where we're accounting for affinity in building groups, and this case is the previous case that we had, right? And we're showing, for instance, that just for correctness and completeness of the outcome of the text that they have, these are doing better, the groups that are formed using affinity. And then the other interesting thing, and these experiments we run it over and over again, so many times, is we kind of wanted to, one of the things you find in literature is that groups of size 7 is sort of like this sweet spot, to reuse a word. And it seems that groups of size 7 are actually doing better. So meaning that it's not a matter of adding more qualified people, that affinity breaks beyond a certain point for collaborative editing, okay? And in particular for translation in this case. And this shows that, for instance, that this number, okay, it's not hugely better, but it is better, right? When k is equal to 7. All right? So what is this saying? It's simply saying that, yes, when we're doing all this, when we're reasoning about these human factors that are skill and, expected wage, we also need to account for group level factors such as affinity, for instance, right? And size of the team when assigning tasks to individuals. Yeah.
Yeah, what about 6 and 7?
Sorry?
What about k equal to 6 and 8?
I don't
Is it
know.
optimum?
I don't know, yes. I don't know what 6 and 8, I don't know what the results were. I forgot. Kind of many years ago. But I remember running it over and over again because we want to make sure that, that this number is actually consistent across.
7 is the optimum given by the optimization or?
Given, given the task, the specific task, which is translation, and given the way we're forming our groups, of course. Yeah, so I don't want to go, in any case, these kind of things, they have to be very specific, right? So we can't, so 7, at least in the, in the literature, it says for editing, collaborative editing, right? So it's more general than that. But the only thing that we verified in this experiment is the translation. Okay, so let me tell you about motivation. That's another factor that sort of, affects the way you think about, you reason about designing algorithms. Okay? So far I told you about collaborative tasks, and I told you about this one-shot optimization, right? Where we build the teams and then people go and do whatever they're doing and we check the quality of their contributions. All right? Well, it turns out in practice, workers are involved in a series of tasks. So now we're going to go back to micro tasks, right? Not, collaborative tasks. Macro task is something you do just by yourself, right? And one thing that's interesting here is that their motivation, in fact, evolves quite a bit in a session, right? So people will log in, and they're there for 2 hours. In 2 hours, you can do quite a few tasks, right? And one thing, there's a paper by some colleagues at Stanford in one of those conferences, CSCW 2017, where they observed people for a period of 9 months. They hired people on a crowdsourcing platform for a period of 9 months, and they just gave them a number of tasks to do, and for different periods of time, different session lengths, and they studied their strategic behavior. In fact, they studied what they call boredom. All right. So one of their findings is that people who are highly skilled and know exactly what they're doing, as soon as they're tired or bored, okay, the quality of their contribution can be observed, right, behind the scene, and it starts dropping. As soon as you observe that drop, in fact, they leave. They come back later, okay. So they're very professional, right, about their contributions and their presence, basically, on these platforms, okay. It's not always the case for everyone. But there is definitely something that has to do with the experience of that individual and how do you capture it, right? And how do you detect it, okay? And so let's think about motivation. And so we thought, all right, let's try to figure out what motivation means and how can we model it and how do we put it into the algorithm. So naturally, the way you want to think about it is not as a one-shot optimization problem, right? You want to watch people as they complete tasks, right? Catch something about their motivation, and then inject that into the optimization problem, right? And so that sort of, changes the way we're designing the whole process and needs to make the algorithm more adaptive in a sense, right? To observing people. Again, here we adopted a kind of simple way of doing it, and I have another 10 minutes. Good. Okay, so the good thing is that in the social sciences they've studied all these things, right? So you look around, and all right, so I've kind of moved on a few years ahead, about 35 years ahead, but one of the very first papers that formalized motivation at work was like in '76, right, by Hackman and Alden. It's sort of a famous paper in psychology of work. where they ask themselves the question, how do I represent the motivation of individuals? What are the attributes? How do I break it down into a number of observable things, observable attributes, okay? And then later, 35 years later, there are others who said, let's verify this motivation model on Amazon Mechanical Turk. Does it hold on virtual marketplaces, okay? So the very first model had just a few of these parameters, motivation factors. And then this other model in 2011, they sort of, they had many more factors, and that's what they observed. So what did they do? They got people to complete tasks on Amazon Mechanical Turk, different tasks that have like a humanitarian purpose. For instance, tagging images that are taken by drones, not drones at the time, but images of buildings, basically, right? That are broken after, some damage, after an earthquake, or right. And then they had other tasks that are not, they had tasks, for instance, that were standalone tasks that were part of bigger tasks, right? Then all of that, they had people pick tasks, and then ask them why they picked such tasks, and sort of did all sorts of questionnaires to figure that out. And this is some of their findings. So one of the things they found, so this is a scale from 0 to 3, and one of the things they found is that payment is sort of a big motivation, okay? So people are after the money, right? They want to get paid for their effort, right? But then also, if you look at these motivation factors, they're enjoyment-based motivation. They basically represent sort of like how fun or exciting is the task, or does the task seem, and that's why I picked this task. For instance, this is skill variety. Given a set of tasks, I pick those that sort of give me some diversity, right, in the skills that are required, right, or I stay with the same task because I'm efficient with the same task, right. So it seems to play pretty good, so it has sort of a high aggregated role. Task identity is the task sort of part of a bigger task or not, right? Do I have a feeling that I'm contributing to a bigger task? These are all like soft science things, but they all mean something. Task autonomy, like do I need others or not to complete the task? Is this a task I can do autonomously, or should I ask for help? And things like that. Does the task give me feedback on my performance, right? Some people just do it because they want to, because they have time on their hands, right? And instead of playing some game online, they go and complete tasks. Okay? So this is great for us, right? I mean, people have actually looked at these problems and they said, how do I measure motivation? Okay? Well, we actually took only 2 of these dimensions and said, the simplest form of our optimization problem for task assignment, adaptive task assignment, is going to be the following. So this is the work of my former student who graduated a year ago. It's going to be, we're going to make the following assumption. We're going to say that people are going to choose, out of a set of tasks that are presented to them, they're going to choose tasks either because the payment is interesting, or because this task introduces some variety, right? They're a little bored and they want some variety. And in general, most people are in between, right? Most people are going to pick tasks based on some balance between diversity of skills that are required and how much the task pays, okay? And what we're going to do is, every now and then, we'll re-optimize, right? Every iteration, predefine the notion of iteration, and then we observe people, and then we kind of collect a bunch of points, right? Which are the tasks that people have chosen. And we do a simple regression over those points and learn weights of these 2 parameters. And this is what the motivation function is per individual. Very simple, okay? There are many other ways to look at the problem, including not fixing the shape of the function, right? Trying to learn the function out of people's sort of actions, right? Well, we did something simpler. And what we're doing here is we're learning the alpha. Each iteration has a bunch of tasks. People get to pick the tasks they want out of a set of tasks that are shown to them. And then out of that, we learn the weight of diversity and the weight of payment, right? And simply say that each individual's motivation is a linear combination of these two, right? Each individual's motivation for a set of tasks is a linear combination of these two, all right? And this is sort of will somewhat predict what the individual is going to want in the next iteration, and so we optimize for that. We assign tasks that maximize this. Okay, this is again sort of a hard-ish problem that we solve, but what I want to focus on here is just some results. Some are conclusive and others are not, right? This is sort of an interesting thing. When you're dealing with humans, you're like, okay. All right, so here it is. So for instance, in this case, we said, okay, let's do this optimization based on the motivation, maximizing motivation, the way we define motivation, right? Let's do it based on diversity only, and let's do it based on just relevance, right? Like we assign tasks that are relevant to your skills. That's it, right? We don't look at your strategic behavior from before, right? And we took tasks in Crowdflower. At the time it was called Crowdflower, because Crowdflower became Figure 8 last year. And the good thing with this is that the task can be classified into kinds of tasks, types of tasks, and so you can compute diversity, right, for a set of tasks. It's simply an aggregation over pairwise difference in terms of their requirements of the tasks. And in this case, we have 58 workers from Amazon Mechanical Turk who completed a total of 2,700 tasks in 80 iterations in total, right? Some stayed, others left. That's what we're measuring. So here's one thing here. This is simply throughput, right? The first question you ask yourself is, as a platform, do I have a good throughput in terms of tasks? Meaning, number of tasks completed per unit of time. In this case, I don't remember. This is cumulative anyways, right? So what are we seeing here? We're sort of seeing that motivation, so this is the time axis. We're seeing that motivation is doing slightly better, right? So the tasks that people receive by observing their motivation, right? And people are actually, let's say, faster at completing these tasks, right? Faster in terms of task throughput. Okay? Here's another thing. This is correct answers. So all of those tasks are tasks for which we have a ground truth, right? If it's a tweet classification task, we have a ground truth. So we pre-label those tasks first, and we have the ground truth. And then we check if people are actually doing a good job or not in their contributions, all right? Against the ground truth. Well, it turns out, for instance, here, if you look at it, this is just an interpretation, all right, to be taken, sort of carefully. So here is what it's saying. It's saying that tasks, when people receive tasks that are highly diverse, they're not as fast, the previous one, as when they receive tasks that are very similar to their profile or tasks that match their motivation. They're not as fast in terms of task throughput, but they may be more careful, and they're doing a better job overall, right, in terms of the contributions that they're providing. Okay, so there is sort of an overhead, right, of context switching when you pick tasks that are different, right, and so you're slower, but they seem to be doing well in terms of the contributions. Okay, so it all depends on what are we optimizing for, right? So it sort of introduces these other dimensions of what we should be optimizing for. There's one last point. One has to do with people's kind of experience with the system, right? So this is what we're calling retention, right? Which is basically the percentage of sessions that ended after a certain number of minutes, meaning people, the drop-off rate, right? So the fastest the graph falls, right? Sort of the fastest people are leaving the system. Like how long are they staying in terms of, this is in terms of minutes, right? So in about, 28 minutes, right, we observe that the motivation-based one is actually, people are sticking a bit longer with the motivation-based task assignment. They're sticking longer around than, for instance, the one that is based on just assigning tasks based on how relevant they are to their profile. Okay? So to be sort of examined more thoroughly. All right. So that's the outcome. Okay. So clearly, taking into account different human factors will dictate the way we're designing the algorithms. In particular, here in task assignment, individuals. And one thing clearly that comes out of this is that these factors need to be observed, and maybe better than what we have done so far, right? Rather than learning weights of these factors, we need to learn functions, or right? Basically, what we've seen is that scale, affinity, critical mass yield higher quality contributions, and that motivation yields better worker retention. So whether we're going for data-centric goals, such as the quality of contributions, or human-centric goals, which is like, are people staying longer? Are they more satisfied? Right? It is something that should dictate the way we go about sort of this assignment of tasks. Okay. One last thing. So this piece of work we started about 8 months ago now, with a bunch of with a law professor and prof in business and management in Grenoble. The law professor moved to Caen, and with Shadi Bassiouni, who is at AUB. Okay. So this is the last piece of thing that I want to tell you about. So there's quite a bit of work going on around fairness, right? And one thing we wanted to do here is to look at this problem on virtual marketplaces and in task assignment. Okay. And, okay, so let me just move to, let me, try to sort of specify the problem quickly and give you just a sense of it. We have an EDBT paper coming up and a demo, I can share the video link with you, and we're putting it online as a demo, not just a video. Okay. So here's how people, remember those virtual marketplaces I told you about that are freelancing marketplaces? If you're looking for somebody to do some web design for you, you can put in, query, and people are ranked. Okay, so you get like a list of individuals like this. And all of them mention web design in their qualifications, or at least this says the latest jobs they got. Sorry, this is in France, so it's in French. The latest jobs they got, but sort of people get ranked in some way. Okay? And one question around fairness is, how fair is this ranking? Okay? You can view fairness, there's quite a bit of work around fairness, in learning and all sorts of other areas, but the way we look at it is that how fair this ranking is when we're asking queries over individuals. Okay? And here is one sort of formulation, and I sort of will quickly outline it and then leave you with that. Okay? So one way to formulate the problem is that as input we have a single task, right? Here we had a single query looking for somebody to do some web design. Okay? We have a single task, we have a set of workers, and as outcome we have a ranking of these workers. Okay? The workers, so here each record is a worker. So we have some attributes that are protected attributes. Right? They're protected by law. And we have attributes that are inferred attributes. For instance, the experience of an individual, some result of a test, some approval rate. Okay? And let's say that our assignment function here is simply to get people to transcribe an audio, right? I mean, check the transcription of an audio, text transcription of an audio. And so it makes sense to have a sort of qualification function. That is this one, right? Language test and approval rate, for instance. So it matters to me to get people who are sort of good, perceived well in the system, and they have a good English test. They are good, whatever, 30%, right? And this is my score for each individual. So if I have a function like this one, supposedly, I'm not really, this function is not explicitly discriminating among individuals, right? It's not using any of the protected attributes. So for instance, in criminal law in France, there are 23 protected attributes, right? These are all part of these protected attributes, right? So if you're expressing any assignment of a job, supposedly, based on these attributes, you're potentially discriminating against people. Right? This function is not written in any of these, right? But of course, the problem is that there may be a correlation between the assignment of people, the ranking of individuals, right, based on this test, basically on this score, and these attributes. And this is how we look at the problem, right? And the way we look at it is we first want to quantify what this correlation is, and then we want to fix it. Okay? So given a set of users and a scoring function and the ranking of these individuals based on the scoring function, what we want to do is to find groups or partitions of the space that exhibit some difference between their rankings. Okay. So I hope I have a couple of things here. So just to give you a sense of how it looks like, this is everybody, and you can look at this as a histogram, and scores as a histogram, a distribution, right, of scores. If you break people down according to any of the protected attributes, you'll have multiple such distributions, right, at each level. And you can ask the question of, if I were to take this distribution of scores, right, normalize it by just the scores that I have here, same thing here, right, and I look at the full list that I get out of normalizing each one of the scores here, and compare it to the full list that I have here, right, I can define a notion of discrimination, right, or distance or disparity that is based on this breakdown. Similarly, I can look at this set, and this is a full partitioning of the space, right, the union of this and all these people. And within each partition, I can normalize the scores and look at my new ranking and how different it is from the previous ranking. Right? So this is a way to look at the problem. And for those who are familiar with what's going on these days in fairness, you know, it's one form of sort of quantifying fairness for ranking. Okay? So that's what I wanted to say. There's a number of other ways to formalize fairness. I put in some references for those of you who want to look at them and paper. But you know, the way we looked at it is as a ranking problem. So in other terms, you can actually formulate the problem of fairness on virtual marketplaces as a problem of you know, finding some disparity, partitioning algorithm over the space, over the protected attributes, and quantifying the disparity. Okay, so all I wanted to say is that there is another 2 slides. There's a number of other factors we didn't look at. As I said earlier, for instance, we fixed the shape of the function and we learned weights. But when you look more closely, there's a number of things that people look for when we go to those platforms. For instance, something called human capital advancement. And that's sort of connected to things such as learning and peer learning. Okay? That is interesting, I think, to look into. It's like, you know, people come to those platforms because they're expecting to learn something. You know, can we actually quantify that? And then can we then assign tasks in such a way that they learn something through collaboration? Okay? So I think this opens quite don't look at that. So that's it. So I'm done. I think I'm done. Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, yes.
Thanks. We have time for a couple of questions. Are there any questions?
So in the approach you mentioned as a big weight on the payment of people. Does this still work if you are looking at a context where it's volunteer job and people don't get paid?
Yeah, so the function, right, has, at least the very first one, has 2 components, right? It has one that is simply aggregating the skills of individuals, and that's what determines the value that we're maximizing. And it has the other one that's about the wage, right? And you can just drop that component. And in fact, you can do even a better job when you only have an aggregation of the skills, if the function has monotonic behavior, right? A better job in the sense that we have, you know, sort of tighter approximations. Approximation factor. Yeah. So yes, I mean, you can drop the payment part. Now the other one on motivation, you know, you can look at all the motivation factors and say, you know, I only want to observe this and this and that, and you know, and not observe the payment if you wanted to. Okay. But yes, the behavior is different. Clearly, there is payment when there isn't. And generally, you know, papers that are sort of CSCW kind of papers, you know, where they actually do empirical observations, they distinguish clearly between these two. They expect very different behavior. But from an algorithmic viewpoint, we can play with these different components.
Motivated by this question, an example of a marketplace where there is no payment would be a conference and assignment of papers to reviewers.
Yeah.
Does this help? Do these methods help?
I think it needs, I mean, it's worth experimenting with to know, because I don't know a priori. Today, yes, today the way it works, yeah, is that the teams have a fixed size, 3 people, and you have kind of a similar setup where you bid or you don't bid, okay, you use your skills, or, and then, you know, CMT, for instance, does this mapping, right? So where would it work? Maybe it would save time to PC chairs to find a replacement for a PC member who's not being, who's being delinquent. Rather than to have to go through 200 PC members and figure out, you know, is this person. Okay, I mean, for these things, right? I mean, today, for this kind of tasks, you know, you know what you're optimizing for, right? It's mainly people who are, and then you're not facing all the human factors of people are not showing up supposedly, or so you just want to maximize the matching, right, in terms of skills. Yes, I don't know, yeah, and then each individual writes a review. So the question is, can you algorithmically improve the quality of reviews in a way, right? I think the setting is quite simple. Just make everything visible to others, and then people care about their, what is it, the social signal factor, I think it's called. Yeah.
Any other questions?
And I'll share the slides, and I'm happy to answer questions if anyone has questions later by email.
Let us thank
Thank you.
again.